Hey scholars, so we're going to jump into Unit 5, Lesson 20, continuing our conversation on the impacts of the fall of the Han Dynasty on ancient China. Alright, let's jump into our do now. For this do now, you're going to answer two questions. The first is the fill in the blank. The second is answering who was victorious at the end of the Three Kingdoms period. Let's take a look at the text. The Jin Dynasty, 265 to 420 CE, was founded by Sima Yan. In 265, as a governor of the Kingdom of Wei, Sima Yan forced blank to turn over his throne. Soon after Sima Yan seized the throne, he gave himself a new name, Emperor Wu Di. He established the Jin Dynasty. In 280, Emperor Wu Di, formerly Sima Yan, sent his troops to attack the Kingdom of Wu, and eventually defeated the last kingdom of the Three Kingdoms period, which was 220 to 280. The dynasty had unified the whole nation. However, the empire continued to suffer from attacks by northern tribes and was often unable to maintain control over northern territory. So at this time, go ahead and pause the video, review your text, and answer your two questions. All right, so now that you've taken the time to answer your questions, let's see how you did. The first answer is going to be the fill in the blank, the emperor. There's no king at this point in ancient China, and also the warlords are in control of different regions, but for this one, we're wanting to look for the emperor. All right, an example of what you could have done for number 2 was who was victorious at the end of the Three Kingdoms period. An example answer would have been the Wei were victorious because the text talks about Sima Yan taking control, and he was the governor of Wei. So you can use whatever evidence from the text, but that would be a good example of something you might have. So moving on to our content, we see two maps here. The first is of the Three Kingdoms period from 220 to 260 CE on the left, and that's going to lead us into the Jin Dynasty from 265 to 420 CE, right? It looks very, very different, and the Jin did get control of quite a bit, but we see something weird going on at the top of the map, right? The Jin Dynasty of the Wei Kingdom took over the majority of the former Han territory in the southern part of central China specifically, but they were unable to truly conquer the northern territory, so they were not able to completely reunify the empire, right? The Wei is the most victorious kingdom at this point, right? And we know that because there's a note that says the Jin Dynasty was part of the Wei Kingdom, and we know that they're controlling the majority of this land in ancient China. So again, the Jin are able to conquer most of the south of Central Asia, but they're not able to truly unite all parts of the old Han territory. And we'll see how that plays out in our next couple of documents today. All right, an extension of our content is understanding that in this time period, there are a lot of Jin emperors. There is a chart on your worksheet that gives the Jin emperors in chronological order. So starting in 266 and going into 325. These, of course, are common era dates. So if you need to make a note of that, you have some space underneath your chart to do so. All right, but I want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of documents A and B. Right, both of these documents were written in 362 CE, and they're discussing the impact primarily of 3 of the emperors that you find on this chart. So once you look at document A, you should be able to identify which 3 emperors they are and make a note underneath your chart to make sure that you can keep the date range in mind. But I want you to look at this chart and try to make an inference. Again, an inference is an educated guess based on logic, reasoning, and evidence. So what can we tell from this? All right, I want you to take a moment, look over the different dates, and see how many emperors we have over this period of time. If you recall, we've looked at a few lists of chronological people in power. One of the instances was in our study of ancient Rome. We saw a period of 50 years where they had something crazy like 25 different emperors because they just kept assassinating one another. with this particular chart, we do see that there's a lot less. We definitely don't have 25 emperors in like 50 years, but we still have quite a few, right? There are 7 emperors in less than 60 years, and you even have someone like Simalun there, like kind of near the middle, where he only rules for a year, really. So there's also a gap there after him. So that could cause some political instability or be reflective of some political instability. So when you're taking a look at information like this, definitely look for the dates and the people, but I want you to always be thinking critically of what can we tell about this point in history based off the information we're seeing. In this case, it looks like there's probably some political instability because there are 7 emperors in less than 60 years. So always keep that stuff in mind as you're looking at our resources. All right, and before we jump into our documents, we always want to review our DBQ. Our question for today is, to what extent was the Jin dynasty able to reunify China? So at this time, go ahead and pause your video and select which annotations on your worksheet you think best clarify the question. So go ahead and pause your video at this time. All right, so let's see how you did. There should be 4 annotations that you chose. The first being to what extent, meaning how much, if we're looking for all or some. All right, the second is the Jin dynasty. This is the ruling family after the 3 kingdoms period. The third is reunify, which means to bring back together or assemble. And the last is China. We know that this is the place of the old Han dynasty, previously also the 3 kingdoms period, and now we're talking about the Jin dynasty. So knowing that geographical location is very important. So looking at our first document, Document A is a memorial by General Huan Wen of the Jin dynasty in 362 CE. Let's go ahead and jump into the text and see what we can learn about this period of Chinese history. Emperors Huai and Min were not capable, allowing barbarian armies to invade repeatedly. The lands became filled with chaos because their rules had strayed from proper behavior. The kingdom immediately fell into ruin and chaos was everywhere. In the thousands of cities, not a single well was left in working condition. The blessing of heaven was not revoked, and Emperor Yan Di, the Jin emperor who followed Emperor Min, soared as a dragon. It was not only because his strength had earned him the help from heaven and the people, but also because the Yangtze River had formed a natural barrier. Thus, the state could be defended. It had been 60 years since the loss and chaos. Loss is referring to the region north of the Yangtze River. The population was so devastated that not even 1 in 100 people were left living. The hills in the area between the rivers were laid waste and all the lands were made barren. Wells were boarded up and the livelihood of countless people could not again be supported. People fled the area south of the Yangtze River and had lived here for several generations. I request 3 armies to take control of the area again. So just to recap what we were just able to read, right? The Jin emperors were corrupt and unworthy of rule. They're not ruling from, quote, proper behavior, as the general says, right? This led to a lot of chaos in the north and destruction of cities. He's saying that not 1 in 100 people survived. That's a lot of loss of life. Then he's saying they did regain control over the empire, but not the whole thing, because the north is still abandoned and they're needing help to get that fixed. So, in this text, the general is requesting armies to take the north back. It has not been reunited with the rest of the empire, and he wants this to be fixed. So, when you're writing your central idea, I want you to really try to tie this back to your DBQ, right? Has the North been reunited yet, right? Again, our question is, to what extent did the Jin dynasty reunify China? Has it done that successfully yet? If so, explain to me using evidence from your text. If not, same thing. Explain to me how you know that based off of document A. So at this time, go ahead and pause your video, complete your central idea, and we'll move to document B. All right, document B. This is actually the response of the Jin Emperor Mu as a request that he had sent the military to recapture the land north of the Yangtze River in 362. So document B today is actually the response from the emperor to the general's request that we just read in document A, which is kind of cool that they both survive. All right. This response ultimately led to the military defeat of the Jin dynasty when they attempted the military action. So we get this extra note that, hey, this isn't going to work out super well, but let's see what the intention of the emperor was in his response. So let's take a look at the text. More than 50 years have passed since the time of loss and chaos. Again, this is referring to that same loss of the land north of the Yangtze River. The barbarians have committed violence and continue in their evil ways. Speaking longingly with desire and looking to the northwest, our heart is overfilled with regrets. As emperor, I know you want to lead the three armies to wash away the filth, clean up the territory, and recover the old capital. The area between the rivers is wasteland. There will be much challenge. I now give to you the burden of this military action. So to recap what we just read over, we see again that this is a response to the general's request in document A, and the emperor actually agrees to provide the general with the armies he's requesting, which is a big deal. We know historically that hasn't always been the case. We also see the emperor's concern because there is a lot of work to be done to reunify this area because the region between the rivers is barren, right? It's not sustaining life in the way it should, and their agriculture isn't working the way it should in this area. So it's going to take a lot to regain that land and that territory, right? I want you to keep in mind as you're writing your central idea, what does the emperor feel about the northern territories? Right? Specifically, you want to see the feeling that he has about the work it's going to take, and also why he's so upset about the state that the North is in. Right? The other thing to keep in mind, again, tying this to your DBQ, was the general able to really reunify? Not quite, right? The response was written in 362. And by around 420, 18 years later, according to the map that we looked at earlier in class, like the North still remains in control of barbarian tribes. So even though the general's trying to get military support and the emperor is backing him with that, it still doesn't seem to be working out for them. So go ahead and pause the video at this time, jot down your central idea, and we'll start wrapping it up. All right. So now that we're ready to wrap up our lesson, before you get to your exit ticket, there's a couple things I want you to do. The first is, I would like you to write an assertion that answers the DBQ. To what extent was the Jin dynasty able to reunify China? Again, we know that they're not completely able to reunify at this point in history, but they do make some progress. So you want to make sure that you recognize that. Also, make sure that you've accessed all of your lesson resources and you're feeling confident with this material before you jump into the exit ticket. All right. And then last, bring any questions to our Zoom meeting. Try not to complete the exit ticket before you come to the meeting and ask any clarifying questions. All right. I want you to make sure that you have all the information that you can before you submit your exit ticket. I'm seeing a lot of kiddos rushing through these, and I know that you can produce really good work if you take your time. So make sure you come prepared with questions to our Zoom meeting. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I look forward to seeing you guys.